in color TV, which of course did not exist in 43. All we had is 10-inch black and white at that time. And there were other larger experimental systems, but no color. And here we were watching color TV, and everything from the Man on the Moon to the Cold War to freeway traffic and jams in the big cities and the status of the Cold War. Cold War, what's that? Well, we've listened and watched and said, this doesn't feel like anything we know. And then, of course, the commercials. And the commercials are what really did it. Particularly the one, which I still think was American Airlines. It could have been any one of them. Announcing, or throwing it out in the audience, as they do in some of these commercials, on your next vacation trip to Hawaii, why not fly with us on our 747 jet? And then, of course, they show a picture of a 747 jet in flight. We look at this thing and say, huh? What's that?
See your jaws dropping.
Because, obviously, 747 jets or anything like it didn't exist in 43. The Germans had jets for the military, which they had just barely put into production, though the production versions of the ME-263, I think it was. Then there was the rocket plane, which was yet to appear in 43, but the Germans had early jets, but we had no commercial jets of any kind in 1943. No one did. And so here we are suddenly introduced to a world of commercial jets. So we really look at each other and says, it looks like the old man is telling it straight. So we went down to his office and looked him up and said, okay, gentlemen, are you convinced? He said, yeah, I guess we are. I said, well, we've got a problem and we need your help. I said, okay, what's that? He says, well, as you probably gather by now, the Eldridge is pulled out of its normal space-time location by interlocking with the Montauk project, and it's in hyperspace. And it's an artificial area, and this hyperspace bubble that it's generating is getting bigger all the time, and we don't know how large it's going to get. We don't know how long the equipment will stay on, as theoretically it can run for 30 days until the fuel runs out on the diesels. But nothing breaks down. It can run that long, and this bubble might get big enough to engulf the whole planet. Says, you got to go back and shut the equipment off. I says, oh, great. And how are we supposed to get back there? We don't even know how we got here.
It's interesting, though. Was it important that you and Duncan both go back?
It's important that we both go back.
That they couldn't just send somebody else?
No, it had to be us. And we didn't understand the reasoning at that point. I think von Neumann knew the reason very well. We were already part of a time loop, and we had to close it.
Okay.
So I said, well, how are we going to get there? He says, that's no problem. Montauk here, with the equipment we have complete control and mastery over space and time. We can send you any place we want at any time we want. Well, that was rather a mouthful to swallow, that they could do all of that, but they did. They gave us a tour before we were sent back. We did go up on the surface once. We did see the, shall we say, the Montauk Tunnel Hardware, and the point where the tunnel would manifest. It wasn't on then.
I'm going to throw a little curveball at you right now, and then we'll get right back to that. But
okay.
If they had that ability to send you any place, anytime, why couldn't they have gone to, say, the year 2000 and pulled out some nice fancy computer hardware and brought it back and used that instead of the IBM 360s?
Well, they did change them. But the point we could make there is, yes, why not? As a matter of fact, those type of techniques were used by the United States to win World War II. A very special hardware was brought in at the time of the war with Nazi Germany, because Nazi Germany was winning over us hands down.
So you think we actually did do it?
I have some hard information.
That's interesting. We took future technology, brought it into the present, and used it to win the war.
And also certain technical equipments, i.e. special tube receivers, were designed and built in the 80s, and not the 80s, in the 70s, by Preston Nichols, who was an RF expert. Told her to meet these specs. They had to be built with tubes of a vintage of 1941, 42, 43. He says, why? He said, don't ask questions, just do it. So we did. After it was tested, the piece of equipment had to go through certain specs and tests and so forth. Everything's okay. He says, all right, it's ready. But before he turned it over to his boss, he says, I don't know what's going on here, but something very strange. I'm putting a little piece of paper with my name and date on it inside of each one of the IF coils before I seal them up finally with the lids on them and all of this. And then they can have the receiver. We'll just wait and see what happens. I know this is a little bit of an aside, but I told him about some of these things, and he says, yes, I know. He says, one of the strange things that happened in my years of traveling around as an electronic surplus dealer and going to all these swap meets, he says, along about 79, at one of the meets up in New Hampshire, I saw a receiver that looked familiar. And he went up to it and looked at it. He said to the guy who had it for sale, I said, where'd you get this? He said, oh, it's a standard piece of surplus equipment. And he said the nomenclature for the nameplate for the manufacturer and the date of manufacture, the model number, all of this stuff, the whole serial numbers for the military was all on it. He looked at it and says, I think I've seen this receiver before. How much you want for it? Told him, so I'll buy it. He took it home. He says to me later, he says, I swore when I saw that that was the receiver I had worked on a couple of years prior in AIL in the lab and built. And it had a manufacturing date on it of 1940 with a nomenclature and nameplates for 1940 by one of the well-known manufacturers for that year. And he opens the thing up, takes the IF coil lids off, and looks down in the coils, little pieces of paper, and then pulls them out, and there's his name, and there's the date, from about 1978, 79, whatever it was. And a receiver which was manufactured in 1940, supposedly. Now, obviously, the model must have been sent back, and it had to be sent back to the people who built it in 1940. Now, why this commerce back and forth, I don't know. But there are other examples I was cited that we literally took various materials out of the future in order to beat Hitler and beat Japan.
So you think if we did not do that, we would have lost the war?
That's the info I have, yes. Hitler was head and shoulders above us until we started feeding in certain specialized hardware and, of course, found the means to build more powerful aircraft in far greater numbers than he could possibly handle. Because we were sending 1,500 numbers of bombers in one fleet over Germany, bombing the hell out of them day and night. And there's no way the fighter craft they had, no matter how many they had, could handle wave after wave of that size.
It was amazing how quickly it was designed and built.
Yes, it was. It begs another question, how were we able to design modified B-17s and then, of course, B-29s for the Pacific primarily, but they were using B-17s, B-26s, and the British Halifax bombers over Europe at that time in such large numbers. So the British weren't building most of those, we were, and we were flying them over. Huge convoys, pardon the expression, not a convoy per se, but flight assemblages of flying the bombers over to England, via Greenland usually. Bottom line, we beat them, and it took some specialized approaches and hardware. We can go into that in much greater detail or more inferences, but...
Let's get to the point where they said, we need your help, you need to go back to 43.
Right. At that point, I said to him, as I had said before, I said, I don't know how you're going to do this, we don't know how we got here. And he said, we have complete control over space and time. They'd given us one tour of the tunnel, not operational, past the hardware, the wall, where it was installed, seeing some of the heavy equipment, and so forth. And later on, I asked him, so how are you going to do it? He says, you've seen what we showed you about the Montauk Tunnel? I said, yes. He says, we'll ship you back through that. I said, well, how do you know where the outreach is? He says, we know where it is, and we know how to get you there. We'll get you there, and they did. But you're going back with radiation suits on.
Was this von Neumann?
Yes.
Who told you this?
Right.
Yeah. So he seemed to sort of run the show at this point.
At this point, he did. It was his show because he knew what was coming, and even though he was only a consultant, they let him handle this aspect of it. He didn't handle much else anymore at Montauk, but that aspect he did.
So it was a radiation suit when you actually went through the tunnel?
It's not because of the tunnel. It's because of the fact we were going to go through a hyperspace field. And what they got from the way of the reports from me indicated to them that when we made the trip to 2137, we went through some hard radiation someplace in space, hyperspace, whatever it was we were in, which caused all the physical damage. We were radiation burned when we arrived at 2137. So they weren't taking any chances on it. They gave us radiation suits complete with visors, with gloves, everything. And I said, you